The original plan for Babylon 5 was going to be The Gathering and then followed immediately by the series. That wasn't what happened. The suits at PTEN, home of quality television and the finest injection molded polymers, took on Babylon 5 with that plan in place, which was handled in the same way as just the tip. It was a complete lie, soon followed by a deep shafting. Instead, they shot the pilot and then put everybody on hold. They wanted to see whether or not The Gathering was going to do well enough to justify going to series. Which was yet another problem for The Gathering, because if that had been planned up front, it likely would have led to some tweaks to the episode to avoid the excess exposition. If you're a die-hard Babylon 5 fan, you might know the story that the title for this episode came from a Harry Chapin song. And if our future lies on the firing line, are we brave enough to see the signals and the signs? As in Signs and Portents, the title for this season. Of course, I should also add that this is incorrect. While JMS offered that quote once, the song actually says, "If our future lies on the final line, not firing line." I'm not sure if he was deliberately misquoting it or had misunderstood the lyrics, although it is kind of funny to think that a meaningful title could be based entirely upon mishearing something. The episode starts over a Centauri colony right when a jump gate opens and an attacking fleet shows up. While they're busy getting blown out of the sky, we have more important things to worry about, like introducing Ivanova as the new second-in-command of B5. But that's interrupted by Londo. The actors had a substantial amount of time between the pilot and the series, and had to find their characters again. But for Peter Jurassic, all it took was putting on the makeup and then standing up and shouting, "Mr. Garibaldi!" And he was back in character again. Garibaldi's having none of that, though. The Centauri have been lying to humans practically as policy since the two species met, including claiming that Earth was a long-lost Centauri colony, despite their DNA making clear that, appearances aside, they're not remotely alike.
Clerical error.
Clerical error.
Hiding behind the bureaucrats. Usually I expect better from pathological liars. Next they're going to say that the reason they're called Centauri is that from the waist down they're actually horses. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Londo's new staff, Veer, who announces the attack on the colony, and after the titles, Londo is incensed and demanding information from Sinclair. Londo's getting nothing from his own people, so in frustration he's hoping that Earth might know something, but they're in the dark too. G'Kar and Delenn show up, sporting their new makeup for the series, both ignorant as well, so Sinclair plans to call a meeting while everyone gets in touch with their governments so that they can gather and hash this out. An agricultural colony being attacked can be the first step in a war, and Babylon 5's whole purpose is to prevent that sort of thing. Or they might need some kind of joint action if this is some unaligned threat, like the raiders that Ivanova and Garibaldi are looking into. Garibaldi's going to head out there in a Star Fury to look things over himself. After all, in the words of Elvis Presley, you ain't nothing but a hot dog. Talia stops in to introduce herself. She's replacing Lita as their telepath and needs to report to Ivanova, but hasn't been able to thanks to her constantly ducking the telepath. And she seems to be here as well, in the sense that she's terse and essentially tells Talia to piss off. She's more friendly when talking with Sinclair about the attacks. I mean, that's a more upbeat subject, where he surprises her by talking about the honor of the Minbari.
After all, you fought them during the war.
Well, my father always told me, the best way to understand someone is to fight him, make him angry. That's when you see the real person.
So, who knew I'd be tying in the Firefly War Stories review and this one, huh? As with last time, I'll address this afterwards so as not to get in the way of the review. Some of the dialogue here coming from Ivanova, I think it might have been written with a Russian accent in mind.
I do not like Santiago. I've always thought that a leader should have a strong chin. He has no chin, and his vice president has several. This to me is not a good combination.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Elsewhere, Veer is rushing in to relay a signal from the colony for Londo. Early on, First Direction had him play the character like an overexcited mollusk, but thankfully, this was quickly spotted and dialed down as the season went on. Londo looks over the attack and spots a Narn ship among the attackers, and is naturally quite peeved. This revelation means that G'Kar was lying about the attack. Londo runs out to confront the man over it, but G'Kar pleads ignorance at the time that he had said that, only just hearing about it now. Yes, sirree, that is definitely the truth. Londo is incensed at the light-hearted way G'Kar dismisses this, plus turning this into yet another, let me remind you of all your atrocities bits. Which, atrocities are the kind of thing that can cause a grudge, but the thing about them is, you can't really hold to that position if you insist on committing them yourself. Sinclair stops by to ask about the two coming to blows in public on the station, and Londo apologizes for that. He shares an interesting fact, though. If you've seen some of the other reviews, you know that some Centauri have a kind of precognition. Well, it seems that on one subject the Centauri often have a specific application of that in their dreams they can see their death. Yep, a friend of mine knew that he was going to pass away in his sleep, and he refused to go to bed as a result, but proved he was right. Died in his sleep. Passed out behind the wheel of the car. Scary how accurate he was. In Londo's case, he sees himself as an old man. The man that we saw in last week's In the Beginning, in fact, dying of strangulation while he is strangling another. The other man, he eventually discovered, was G'Kar. It's probably helped add a bit of tension to their meetings, every time he checks the agenda to make sure strangle each other isn't secretly on it. Londo's particularly bitter because, instead of joining the military, he got his nephew a cushy, safe job on some harmless agricultural colony. Yeah, the one that was attacked.
Please. On the issue of galactic peace, I am long past innocence and fast approaching apathy. It's all a game, a paper fantasy of names and borders.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Only one thing matters, Commander. Blood. Calls out for blood.
Somebody at BioWare is obviously a Babylon 5 fan, the way they keep lifting stuff from the show. During that drama, Garibaldi's checked out the ship attacked by the raiders, and it's definitely been hit by something bigger than usual. Plus there's signs that there's some kind of leak of where the transports are heading, because the raiders have been doing pretty well tracking down the ships too. But for Sinclair, what matters is stopping a war, so he stops in next to see Kosh. Well, stops in to visit Kosh. Christopher Franke developed the voice for Kosh, actually. Kosh didn't speak on screen in the pilot, but in the special edition we do hear his thoughts, but that was obviously long after Franke had developed the voice for him.
They are a dying people. We should let them pass.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that we might persuade you to take a less, I say, let 'em all die stance. This is the fate of the Narn and Centauri that we're talking about here, You gotta take it seriously.
So the Council can go to hell. And the emergency session can go to hell.
See, Londo's obviously got a passionate opinion on the matter, just not on any specific kind of outcome of it. He's incensed because the Centauri government plans to do nothing in response to the attack. Londo's only hope is that perhaps the Council on B5 can embarrass the Centauri government into action. And on the subject of embarrassing, Talia starts talking to Garibaldi about what's up with Ivanova. She keeps dodging her, so Garibaldi gives some advice. Oh, that's not the embarrassing bit. It's...
Afterward, if you like, you can stop by my quarters and I can show you my favorite thing in the whole universe. Okay, my second favorite thing in the universe.
I wonder if he ever used that line on the Senator, and that's why the guy hates him so much. While Garibaldi's diplomacy stalls there, Sinclair and G'Kar are working some over down in the gardens, where G'Kar wistfully thinks of a future where the Centauri are exterminated. When Sinclair shows his contempt for that, G'Kar points out that the Narn sold weapons to Earth to fight the Minbari when others wouldn't. Although you should leave some space between working to exterminate a species and reminding someone of an effort to exterminate their species. Sinclair rejects any suggestion like this was altruism or something. The Narn will sell to anybody who can pay, period. Except probably the Centauri. I think the only bomb they'd sell them was one that was already ticking. But Sinclair's got other worries. Garibaldi's investigation turns up an explanation on the raider attacks. Somebody hacked the data on the routes from some company. And there's only one target left, except, while it's technically a supply ship, it's actually full of hundreds of refugees. And with the raiders' habit of blowing open the holds, those people are going to have a pretty bad day. And the bad news keeps coming when the senator says that with the election going on, the council vote needs to be delayed, or else Earth must abstain if it must be held. So Sinclair plans to head out and try to deal with the raiders, conveniently meaning that Ivanova will be taking his place, having not received the senator's instructions. G'Kar naturally begins grandstanding during the meeting, pointing out that before the invasion, this world was a Narn colony, so they're just taking back what is rightfully theirs. Delen's not buying what he's selling, though. It's just an excuse to lash out against the Centauri as part of their endless desire for revenge. But to prove that this wasn't an act of unprovoked violence, G'Kar whips out his surprise, a live broadcast from the colony by Londo's nephew, no less. This was less than 2 years after the Gulf War, when downed American pilots were broadcast by Saddam Hussein, saying that the war was unjust after having been beaten and while a man stood off camera threatening with death. This scene here was likely meant to call that to mind, this image of a captive who is so obviously coerced into lying, while those in authority insist that he's backing up the truth that they've been claiming the whole time. Londo's nephew states that because of social problems, they had reached out to the Narn for aid when the Centauri government refused to help them, and that this wasn't a conquest, but an invitation. But with that, and the fact that the Centauri are taking no action, and that the only one accusing the Narn of deception was deceiving the Council by withholding that fact, well, it's a foregone conclusion what will happen.
I move that this council now vote to dismiss all charges against the Narn regime.
In a far more straightforward situation, Sinclair and his forces are busy fighting the raiders, who scatter once they face enemies capable of fighting back. Sinclair takes a few ships into a nearby asteroid field, suspecting to find, and succeeding in finding, the command and control ship for these guys. But before we resolve that, let's check back in with Londo, who is assembling a small gun from hidden pieces around his quarters. He's going to deal with G'Kar a little early, I guess. But of all the people for him to stumble into, he picks Talia. You know, the one who can read your mind, and she can sense his plan. I guess there's no rules on sharing that information when it comes to assassinations, even of dickheads like G'Kar is acting. So she tells Garibaldi, and Garibaldi steps in and stops Londo. It's not easy, but he points out that if G'Kar dies, so too do the colonists that Londo is so upset over. So rather than try to punch the Narn and just hit himself with a dick, Londo backs down. As for G'Kar, that's when he gets jackknifed by the B-plot. Sinclair returns with a Narn prisoner, because when the Narn sell weapons to someone, like the raiders with their new heavy guns, they provide a liaison much like G'Kar served during the Earth-Minbari War. He also happens to have records on the attack on the colony, showing that G'Kar's cover story is complete bullshit. So now he has no choice but to tell the government to pull out, or get sanctioned by everyone up the wazoo, and that suddenly sounded more sexual than I had intended, but that's speaking G'Kar's language anyway. In the epilogue, as the incumbent president Santiago looks favored to win, Talia finds Ivanova off duty, and they get a chance to talk. We quickly see the problem here. Even though Ivanova apologizes, she explains that her mother was a telepath. A weak one, but still everyone with the ability must either join the Psi Corps, go to prison, or take drugs to suppress their abilities. This is to ensure that rogue telepaths aren't running around getting up to mischief. After all, a person who reads your mind can learn your secrets and blackmail you, get information to perform identity theft, pull con jobs on people, in a way that is all completely undetectable. So it's understandable why there would be concerns. But on the other hand, as Ivanova says, those who choose the drugs find the life that goes right out of them, and those that choose the core are drafted into a strictly regulated and tightly controlled system. Ivanova's mother took the drugs for 10 years until she chose the item not listed on that list, suicide. There's a commercial break there because it's a good rule of thumb to have a gap between my mother killed herself and
Dodgers in the 24th and a half century.
Yeah. This incidentally is Garibaldi's second favorite thing in the universe. And sure, the Helix Nebula is impressive, but can it really stand up to Daffy Duck? No. Midnight on the Firing Line gets a stamp of fine. Considering it had to introduce several new characters, it accomplished a lot, but ultimately it felt a little too neatly tied up at the end. But it's not a bad episode. There's some nice character moments, especially for Londo and Ivanova. It was good that they pulled back from Sinclair for the launch here. He was involved, but he didn't dominate the story. So here we are again, revealing the real person point. This time, the means is anger, and like in Firefly, this line contributes a bit to informing about character, in this case to Londo. In the pilot and at the start here, he seems like a man who has fallen from grace and thus embraced that as his lot in life, so he'll enjoy himself at every opportunity with drink, with ladies, with gambling. But when he gets his dander up, what do we find? A man of damn the consequences action who is prepared to take a life in the name of family and Centauri pride. We will see this man more fully as the series goes on. But to explore the topic of revealing the real person, to repeat from last time, the idea of true self can be considered in two possible ways. The person dropping their pretense, deceptions and lies shown to the world, and the person dropping the cocoon around ourselves of self-image reinforced by normal behavior versus that which is allowed to be seen when that is stripped away. Before we go any further, let's point out that psychologists seem to feel that anger is a natural emotion, and it's how we handle that anger that's what's important, that it not be allowed to be destructive without or from within. I mean, anger can be harmful, yes, but then so can other emotions. Anger can lead me to strike someone or to stand up for someone. But love can lead me to try to be a better person, or it can fill me with jealousy or resentment. Addressing the first point about the lies, a line you see around the internet is, listen to people when they are angry because that is when the real truth comes out. It is true that once you've stopped being polite, the truth comes out. And it's true that once you're angry, you can often be impolite. But like in the discussion with torture, words are not necessarily said to serve the truth, but rather to serve the interest of the person who is angry. If, for instance, I come home and my wife has smashed my tablet deliberately, I'll be angry. And if she says, I did it because you're a cheating bastard, I'd come back with, you psycho, I am not cheating on you. What is your problem? And I could be saying that because I haven't been cheating, or I have been, but I'm not coming clean about it. It doesn't serve my interest to blurt out the truth in the second case, so I might not do that, even though I am pissed off in the moment. Or if we're now having an argument now and I blurt out, hey, tell me, fatty, did that break when you dropped it from your fumbling sausage fingers, or were you just pissed when you figured out you couldn't eat it? I may be finally revealing the truth that I think you're fat, or think that I find your appearance shameful, or it might simply be that I'm angry at you and I want to hurt your feelings in that moment, and I say something I know would hurt you, even if it's something that I personally don't think normally. There's a reason that in a court of law, the lawyer is not allowed to respond to an objection with, I want to hear the truth, so I'm saying irrelevant and offensive things to piss off the witness until they say the truth, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness will answer as to whether or not she likes being slapped on the ass by men she's never met. And that's not to mention as to what truth is. If a person blurts out, I wish I'd never married you, it doesn't mean that that's what the real truth is. A marriage is a life-altering event, and if you ever have any kind of life-altering event, you know that at some point you might wonder what have happened if you would have done things differently. You might at some point, when things were bad, blame that event and wish that you hadn't, before later realizing that you were wrong about that. It's not unnatural to have regrets, remember. Even Captain Picard had regrets. And if someone says that, it may indeed be the truth. For the moment. Because our opinions can change on things. So sure, I might say right now that you better leave, you're never welcome in my house again, and mean it in that moment, but immediately realize that it's not really what I want. So I don't think anger necessarily reveals the truth behind the lies. It can reveal more lies, our worst impulses, and our douchebaggery. Addressing the second? Let's think of that in terms of something small and relatable. The U.S. government's foreign policy. When the U.S. government sends troops onto foreign soil in response to a terrorist attack, or when the U.S. government sends money, supplies, and personnel to an area that is suffering from a disaster, which would we say is the real United States? Is an act which is in some ways comparable to anger truer, or is an act comparable to compassion? Is the latter a lie or self-deception that is revealed by the former, or is the former atypical and the latter representative of the truer nation? My thinking? The idea of being the real one is flawed because the nation is too complicated to boil down to something that basic, to focus on one aspect and saying that it supersedes all others. You have a host of things that are happening, shifting social and economic forces, feedback from other cultures, that lead to a response that can be anger in one case and compassion in the other. A person, in my opinion, works on the same kind of principle. We're buffeted by our changing circumstances. Work, family, expenses, things that upset us, things that move us, all things that shape us as people. That's the way it's often described, shaping. And if we are that fluid, then under the stress of anger, it's no surprise we might act in a way we normally wouldn't. But is it really fair to say that that's our true self? After all, when you're in the midst of climaxing, you're probably also acting in a way you normally wouldn't, right? But no one ever says that they're seeing the real person when they blurt out whatever it is they might blurt out in that moment. Because when the events really have in common here is that, along with the subject of torture from last time, we're being subjected to something that is atypical. Few go through their life constantly angry. Few are constantly suffering. And with the possible exception of Matthew McConaughey, few of us are constantly in a state of climax. We behave differently than we normally would because it's an abnormal situation. But that doesn't mean that it's more true. After all, your normal behavior includes things that you believe should be part of your character. And shouldn't that desire count as part of the true you? If I put a gun to your head when you're about to take a bite of pizza and tell you to put it down, no matter how much you love pizza, you're probably going to do it. But that doesn't mean that you have been revealed to be a person who doesn't love pizza, just a person who is unwilling to die for a very stupid reason. Likewise, if something pushes you at so fundamental a level that you no longer behave as you normally would, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the true you that is showing through. You've had an important part of you driven away in that moment. None of this is to say that you are not responsible for what you say and do. They are your words. They are your actions. But I think that they don't deserve more weight in judgment under the reasoning that they represent some kind of special insight. Thankfully, that brings the topic to its conclusion. Next time, it's just aliens trying to sell Picard a weapons system, so I think we can call this done. Next week, though, I've been discussing it. Now it's going to arrive. A clue to the mystery of Babylon 4. Yep. It's Babylon Squared time.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
Go to hell too. I wouldn't want you to feel left out.